Cottonwood Junction, Nebraska, 1886. By 9 o'clock that Tuesday morning, Nell Braithwaite had sent a birth, a foreclosure, and a death, and her face had not changed once. The birth went to Lincoln, 11 words, a boy, both doing well. The foreclosure went to a bank in Omaha and concerned 400 acres out on the Little Blue that had belonged to the Petersons for 19 years and would not belong to them by Friday. The death was a man named Orrin Shaw of Cottonwood Junction, who had been kicked by a mule on Sunday and had not woken up, and whose sister in Iowa learned of it at 8 minutes past 9, because Nell's hand closed and opened on a brass key in a room 10 feet wide. She sent all three. She checked all three. She filed the flimsies on the spike, in order, the way the company required. Then she wound the clock, because it was Tuesday. Nell Braithwaite had worked that key for 6 years. She knew who was in debt in that county, and who was expecting, and who had a son in trouble in Denver. And she knew it before the wives knew, and long before the neighbors did. And she had never once in 6 years repeated a single word of it to anybody. The town understood this about her, and was grateful for it in the abstract, and it did not make one bit of difference. Because in 6 years, nobody in Cottonwood Junction had ever asked her to supper. You do not invite the woman who knows. At 20 past 9, the door opened and let in cold air and the smell of horses, and Wade Trumbull came in with his hat already off. "Morning, Miss Braithwaite." "Mr. Trumbull." He came to the counter and set down a folded delivery tally and turned it around toward her with 2 fingers and said what he always said. "Hands are filthy. Would you write it out?" Nell looked at the hands. They were, in fact, filthy. They generally were. She took up her pen. Wade Trumbull gathered and delivered cattle. He had no land and had never owned an acre. What he owned was 30-odd head of saddle horses, a chuck wagon, a good dog, and an arrangement with 11 ranches north of the Loop. And every season he hired 6 men and went up and took the gather and brought it down to the shipping pens at Cottonwood Junction and put it on the cars. So much ahead, and he had been doing it for 14 years. In 14 years he had never lost a herd and had never come up short at a railhead. That was the whole of his capital. He could not have raised $200 at any bank in Nebraska, and there was not a rancher between the Loop and the Niobrara who would not have handed him 400 head on a handshake in the road. He was 36, broad through the chest, sun-scoured, with a way of standing very still while he thought. He came into the telegraph office roughly once a week, and roughly once a week his hands were too dirty, or the light was too poor, or he had left his spectacles at camp, which was a lie of such magnificent boldness that Nell had thought about it for a week the first time she heard it, because Wade Trumbull had never in his life owned a pair of spectacles. She wrote out what he told her to write. She read it back to him. He said that was fine and paid and went out. It had been going on 11 months. The thing about Nell Braithwaite was that she had learned about her own life the same way the county learned about theirs, which is to say, off a wire, in fragments, at a counter. She had been engaged. His name was Clyde Merrick, and he sold agricultural implements, and he had gone to Chicago in the spring of 1883 to see about a territory, and she was to follow in June, and they were to be married there because his people were there, and hers were nowhere. On the 11th of May, 1883, at 22 minutes past 4 in the afternoon, a message came down the wire from Merrick's employer at Omaha, relayed through Cottonwood Junction because that is how the line ran. Nell took it. She took it the way she took everything, one letter at a time, with her hand on the key and her eyes on nothing, and she got 8 words into it before she understood what she was writing down. He was to be married in Chicago in June, to a Miss Adele Hartman, whose father was in the implement trade. There were 41 words in that message. Nell Braithwaite copied all 41, checked them, and then relayed them on to Omaha, letter by letter, with her own hand, because that was her job and the message was not addressed to her and there was nobody else on the key. Then she filed the flimsy on the spike, in order. Then she finished her shift, which had 4 hours left in it. She learned that she had been thrown over 3 weeks before Clyde Merrick got around to writing her about it, And when the letter finally came, she did not open it, and she still had it, unopened, in the bottom of the tin box where she kept the office receipts. That was the thing nobody in the county knew about the woman who knew everything. Since that afternoon, she had sent perhaps 40,000 messages for other people and had not sent one for herself. She worked out that Wade Trumbull could not read in the second week of March, and she worked it out because of a tally sheet. He had come in with a stack of them and set them down and was going through them with his thumb while she wrote, and one of them was upside down. That was not remarkable. What was remarkable was that he went through 4 more and then came back to that one and turned it over, and turned it back, and his thumb stopped moving. He was looking for something on the page and could not find it because he had no way to find it. And he had turned the page over twice, hunting a shape he recognized. Nell went on writing and did not lift her head. When he had gone, she sat for some while with her hand flat on the counter. She thought about 11 months of dirty hands and poor light and spectacles he had never owned. And she felt something turn over in her chest that was not pity, because pity was not the correct word for it at all, and she was a precise woman. The word was recognition. Here at last was somebody else in Cottonwood Junction who had built an entire life around not being found out. She did not say anything to him. She did not begin to say anything to him. She simply started keeping a pen inked on the counter after that, so he would not have to wait while she filled it, and she stopped reading his messages back to him in the loud, clear voice she used for the deaf, and started reading them back low, the way you tell a man something across a table. He noticed both. He said nothing about either. What Nell had not understood yet, and what she came to understand across April, was that she had been thinking about the whole business exactly backwards. She wrote out to the Penns on the 12th of April because a claim had come in about a short-loaded car, and Mr. Ivers, the Union Pacific's agent at the depot, wanted somebody who could write to go along and take down the numbers. She went because it was a day out of a 10-foot room. She watched Wade Trumbull work a stock pen for 2 hours. There were 61 head in that pen out of 3 ranches, and no papers worth anything, and the brands were a mess. Wade went down the line once, not fast. Then he came back and told the buyer that there were 19 head of Fowlers in there and not 17, that the 2 big roans had come off the bar slash and not off Fowler at all, whatever the tally said. That the black with the split ear was carrying about 80 pounds less than she looked because she was full of water and had been watered late on purpose, and that the man ought to have a look at the near foreleg of the 3rd steer from the gate because it would be lame inside a week and he would not want to be paying beef price for it. He was right about every one of those things. The buyer knocked $11 off and thanked him for it. Writing back, Nell said, "How did you know about the roans?" "Ear notch is wrong for Fowler," Wade said, "and they walk like bar slash cattle. Fowler's got a wet quarter section and his stock come up soft in the foot. Bar slash is all gravel." He shrugged. "You look at a thing for 14 years, you know it." Nell Braithwaite rode the next mile in silence and did some rearranging. She had been carrying, without ever once examining it, the notion that a man who could not read letters was a man who could not read. And she had just watched him read 61 animals, 3 ranches, 1 dishonest waterer, and a lame foreleg off a page nobody had ever written, and get every line of it right, in under 2 hours, in the cold. She could not have told a roan from a bay at 40 feet. "Mr. Trumbull." "Ma'am?" "Nothing," said Nell. "I was being a fool about something. I'm finished now." Wade Trumbull looked straight ahead at the road, and after a while the corner of his mouth moved, and neither of them said anything else the whole way in. Hollis Dray came up from Omaha on the last day of April with a good coat and a leather case and a proposition. He bought cattle on commission for a packing concern, and what he wanted was the whole of the season north of the Lou, exclusive. Every head he bought up there to be received, held, trailed down, and delivered onto the cars by one outfit. It was the largest single piece of work that had ever been offered in Cottonwood Junction to anybody, and he offered it to Wade Trumbull because Wade Trumbull had never lost a herd in 14 years, and every rancher in that country would deal with him. They met at the shipping pens on the 3rd of May. Dre had the papers drawn already. Nell Braithwaite was not there and did not see them, and she knew nothing whatever about the terms. She heard that there was a contract the way the rest of the town heard it, which was in the street 2 days after. What happened at the pens was this. Dre laid out 4 pages on the head of a barrel and talked through them, pleasantly and at length, and pushed them across. Wade Trumbull looked at 4 pages of dense clerk's hand, and there was one thing on all 4 pages he could read with certainty, and it was the shape of his own name where somebody had penciled a small cross for him to sign. For 14 years, the cattle business in that country had been done the way Wade Trumbull could do it. A man came out to your camp and you agreed a price per head, and you shook on it, and that was the end of the discussion. And if either of you went back on it, you were finished in the Lou country for good, and everybody knew it. Then Omaha discovered that country, and Omaha does business on paper. He could have taken it away. He could have said he would look it over. He had been saying he would look it over for 30 years, and every single time he said it, he had to find somebody afterward. And every time he found somebody, he had to invent a reason. And he was 36 years old and tired to the bone of inventing reasons in front of men who bought his cattle. Hollis Dre sat back with his hands folded and waited, comfortable, and said, "Take your time, Mr. Trumbull," in a voice that had all the time in the world in it. Wade signed. He found out what he had signed 5 weeks later. Let me step out of the story for a moment. I don't know where this finds you tonight. Maybe there's a dog asleep against your foot and you don't want to move and wake him. Maybe you're on the last leg of a drive and the lines on the road have started doing that thing they do. Maybe it is simply late and quiet and nobody wants anything from you for 1 hour. If Nell and Wade have earned a little of your evening, tapping that like button helps this quiet corner keep its lamp lit. And tell me down in the comments the name of the town you're listening from. I read every single one. Now, back to Cottonwood Junction. Because a shipment of cattle has gone bad on a siding at Grand Island, and Hollis Dre is standing at the telegraph counter with a message he wants sent, and he has got the time wrong on it, and he has got it wrong on purpose. The first big consignment went out on the 8th of June, and by the time it reached Omaha, the loss on it came to better than $600. The way that business had always been done in the Loop country, a drover brought them down when he brought them down. If the cars were not there, you held on the grass above the pens and waited, and nobody wrote a word about it, because everybody in that country understood that cattle do not travel to a timetable. The contract Wade Trumbull signed on the 3rd of May did not agree. It said the drover would deliver each consignment into the shipping pens, counted and loaded, by 8 o'clock in the morning of the day named, in time to make the morning train and the afternoon connection at Grand Island. And it said that where a shipment missed that connection through late delivery by the drover would bear the whole of the shrinkage and every loss arising out of the delay. That was the clause. 19 words of it did the work. Wade Trumbull had 140 head counted, weighed and loaded into 6 stock cars, and the doors shut on the last of them at 7:40 on the morning of the 8th of June, 20 minutes inside his hour. The shipment went down on the morning train and reached Grand Island in good time for the afternoon connection. The shipment missed the connection anyway. It missed it because Hollis Dre's forwarding order had never been filed, and a railroad does not move somebody else's cattle on the strength of goodwill. So the 6 cars were set out on a siding to wait for instructions. The instructions came the following morning. In between, they stood 19 hours in 91-degree heat with 140 head shut inside them. By the time the shipment moved again, 4 head were down and 11 more would never weigh what they should. That was Hollis Dre's clerk and Hollis Dre's order, and nothing whatever to do with any drover. But a siding keeps no record of whose fault it was. All a siding does is stand there in the sun with the cars on it. $600 was Wade Trumbull's whole margin for the year and part of the next one. Hollis Dre came into the telegraph office at 4 in the afternoon on the 10th of June with a message written out in his own hand for the packing concern at Omaha, and Nell Braithwaite read it at the counter, the way she read every message, because she had to count the words. It said, "The cattle had been loaded at Cottonwood Junction at 11 o'clock in the morning on the 8th. Nell said. "This is wrong." "I beg your pardon?" "The loading time." She kept her voice flat and pleasant. "That shipment went out on the 7:40. It's on the station sheet." "Then the station sheet is mistaken." "The station sheet is Mr. Ivers'," Nell said. "And the train order's mine. I sent it. 7:40. Hollis Dray looked at her for a moment, and Nell watched him decide what she was, and watched him decide that she was a woman in a small room who wanted to keep a job. "Miss Braithwaite," he said kindly, "you send what you're handed. That's the position." And there he was almost right, and she knew it. An operator does not sit in judgment on what a customer chooses to say. If Hollis Dray wanted to make a false statement to his own employer, that was between Hollis Dray and his employer and the Almighty, and it was no business of a telegraph key. Except that Nell Braithwaite had sent the train order herself and knew to the minute when that shipment had gone, and knew what an 8 o'clock deadline was for, and could not make 3 hours mean anything on this earth except that somebody was to be made late who had not been late. She had been reading other people's mail for 6 years. She could see the whole shape of it standing in front of her in a good coat, and except for one other thing. "It isn't what you're saying," Nell said. "It's what I'd be recording." She turned the paper around on the counter to face him. "Every message that leaves this room goes on the office sheet with the time and the file number and my initials, and that sheet is bound and sent to Omaha and kept. That's Western Union's book." She put one finger on the counter. "The station sheet and the train order are down that hall in Mr. Ivers' office, and they are the Union Pacific's book. I only rent this corner from the railroad, Mr. Dray. We are 2 different companies with 2 different sets of records and 2 different men in Omaha who read them." She looked up at him. "So if I send that, then by Friday there is a Western Union record saying 11 o'clock over my initials, and a Union Pacific record saying 7:40 over Mr. Ivers's, about the same shipment, on the same morning, in the same building." She set the paper down. "You're not asking me to send a lie. You're asking me to put one in a book that somebody else can check." Hollis Dray's pleasantness did not go anywhere. It simply stopped being aimed at her. "The company will hear about this." "I expect it will," said Nell. "I'm about to write it a letter." She did not send the message. She wrote out, in the operator's log for the 10th of June, in the plain hand she had used for 6 years, the exact text she had been handed, the time it was presented, the discrepancy with the station sheet and the train order, her refusal, and the reason for it. Then she signed it. Then she made a fair copy for the division superintendent at Omaha and one for Mr. Ivers. And then she wrote out her resignation and put it with them, because she had worked 6 years in a company office and she knew exactly what happened to an operator who told a paying customer no, whatever the reason, and she preferred to go on her own feet. She did all of that in about 40 minutes, alone, in a room 10 feet wide, and there was nobody in the world for her to talk it over with, and she did not talk it over with anybody. Now, she knew there was a contract between Dray and Wade Trumbull. The whole street knew that. What she did not know was one single word of what was in it, and it did not once cross her mind that a loss on Hollis Dray's cattle could land on anybody but Hollis Dray, because in that country it never had. She did it because she had spent 3 years sending other people's words with her own hand, including 41 words on the 11th of May, 1883, that had taken her whole life apart. And she had sent every one of those without complaint because they were true, and it was her job. This one was not true, and it was going in the book over her initials. Wade Trumbull came to the office at 8 that evening. The blinds were down, and she was clearing the counter into a crate. He stood in the doorway with his hat in his hand. "Ivers told me," he said. "Then you know as much as I do." "He said you quit." "I resigned," Nell said, which is the same thing wearing a collar. Wade came in and set his hat on the counter and did not sit down. He stood there long enough that she stopped what she was doing, and then he said, in a voice she had not heard him use, "Miss Braithwaite, I'd like you to tell me what's in that contract." Nell stopped with a ledger in her hands. "I've never seen the contract." I know it. He was looking at the counter. I'd like you to read it to me. And there it was, sitting between them in a dark office with the blinds down. And Nell understood that he had come up from the shipping pens knowing perfectly well what he was going to have to say, and had come anyway. All right, she said. No. Wade Trumbull lifted his head. No, that's not the whole of it, and I'll not have it done halfway. His jaw set. I can't read. Never could. I was pulled out of school at 8 years old to drive team, and I never went back, and I've been 30 years covering it, and I'd rather you had it out of my mouth and worked out on your own. He stopped. Then he said, which I believe you did. In March. Nell put the ledger down. March, she agreed. The tally sheet. The tally sheet. I knew when you inked the pen ahead, Wade said. Nobody's ever done that. 11 months I've been coming in here inventing reasons, and one day the pen was inked and you never said a word about it. And I have thought about that pen a great deal more than I would care to admit to you. He turned his hat over on the counter. I've had folks be kind to me about it before, once or twice when it got out. They talk slower afterward. You never once talked slower. You read 61 head of cattle in 2 hours in the cold, Nell said. I'd have taken a week and got it wrong. Why would I talk slower? Wade Trumbull looked at her. Read me the contract, he said. She read it to him at the counter with the blinds down and one lamp burning, 4 pages, aloud, twice, and the second time through she stopped at the clause and read it a third time by itself. He listened with his hands flat on the counter and did not interrupt. When she was done, he said, So it's mine, the whole 600. If you were late, yes, that is the entire work that clause does. I wasn't late. No. 7:40, 20 minutes in hand. He said it slowly, the way a man says a thing at the moment he understands it. But if the book says 11, then I missed the connection. And if I missed the connection, then those 19 hours on that siding are mine, and the 4 dead are mine, and every pound the rest of them sweated off in that heat is mine. Yes. He isn't lying to his own house about a load of cattle, Wade said. He's lying about me. They did load at 7:40, Nell said. The train order says so. The station sheet says so. I sent the order myself, and it's on the office sheet with my initials and the file number, and that sheet goes to Omaha and is bound and kept. She set the pages down. And there's a letter going down with it explaining exactly why Mr. Dre wanted it to say 11. Wade Trumbull stood very still for a moment. You did that this afternoon, he said, before you knew. I didn't do it for you. I know you didn't, he said. That's the part I'm sitting with. He went down to the packing concern himself in Omaha on the 15th of June, and he did not take a lawyer because he could not afford one. He took paper instead, which had never in his life been his weapon, and he took it because Nell Braithwaite spent the 12th and the 13th of June making certain he had the right kind. He could not have the originals. That was the first thing she explained to him, twice, because he did not like it. A telegraph operator does not hand a company's bound record to a private man, not for any reason, not ever. What he could have were copies that a stranger in an office would have to believe. So Mr. Ivers made out a certified copy of the station sheet and of the train order for the 8th of June, under the Union Pacific stamp, and signed it as agent, which he was entitled to do, and which he did with a good deal of satisfaction, because Mr. Ivers had disliked Hollis Dre on sight in a way he had not been able to justify until now. And Nell went before the notary at the county seat and swore out a statement that a message was presented to her at the Western Union office at Cottonwood Junction at 4 in the afternoon on the 10th of June by Hollis Dre, that it gave the loading time as 11 o'clock, that she declined to transmit it, that she entered the whole of it in the operator's log for that date over her initials, and that the log itself was in the company's hands at Omaha and could be called for by anybody with standing to call for it. That was the thing. Not the paper he carried. The paper he could not carry, sitting in a bound book in another company's building in another town where Hollis Dray could not get at it and could not deny it and could not have it lost. Then Wade Trumbull rode down to Omaha with a certified copy in one pocket and a notarized affidavit in the other, and Nell Braithwaite on the seat beside him, and she read the contract aloud to the concern's freight agent, all 4 pages, in a plain voice, and then read the affidavit, and then stopped. The freight agent for a packing concern in Omaha in 1886 did not care one way or the other about Wade Trumbull. What he cared about was that his own buyer had left 6 loaded stock cars standing 19 hours on a siding in June heat, had then attempted to move the paperwork, and had been refused and written up by a Western Union operator in a book his company did not own and could not reach. The concern did not settle that afternoon. What it did was wire both companies for confirmation over its own name, and 3 days later the 2 answers came back from 2 different buildings in 2 different towns and agreed with each other to the minute. Then it settled the loss. Hollis Dray kept his position. Men like Hollis Dray generally do. He was moved to a territory in Kansas, and Cottonwood Junction did not see him again. Wade Trumbull got his season back. Nell Braithwaite did not get her job back and did not ask for it. What she did instead took until September, and it took a letter to New York and a great deal of arithmetic on the back of a flimsy. The Postal Telegraph Cable Company had been put back together that very year out of the wreck of 2 failed concerns, and had money behind it for the first time, and was pushing west with a great deal of nerve and not nearly enough people. It was looking for agents in towns exactly like Cottonwood Junction and finding it slow going, because towns exactly like Cottonwood Junction already had a wire and a man in a green shade. The regional man wrote back that they had nothing at all on that stretch west of Grand Island, and no prospect of anybody, and asked what experience she held. Nell replied that she held 6 years on the key, and enclosed written references from a railroad agent, 3 ranchers, a cattle outfit, and a county judge. He answered that letter by return. She leased a room on the north side of the street from Mr. Ivers's brother-in-law, and leased wire time, and went in as agent on commission, and on the 14th of September, 1886, Nell Braithwaite sat down at her own key in her own office and sent her own first message, which was a notice to the Cottonwood Junction Clarion advertising the rates. The town came. Some of them came because the rates were a penny better. Most of them came because they had spent 6 years handing that woman the worst news of their lives, and she had never once repeated a word of it. And it turned out they had noticed after all. Wade Trumbull hauled her office furniture down in the chuck wagon and would not take money for it. He came in on Tuesday evenings after that, when the wire was quiet, and she taught him his letters at the counter with the door locked and the blinds down, because he asked her to, and because he would not have anybody else in that county know he was learning. They started with his name. It took him 4 evenings, and he got angry twice and left once, and came back the next Tuesday without a word about it, and Nell did not say a word about it either. The first thing Wade Trumbull ever read without help was a delivery tally, in October, standing at that counter, out loud and slow and wrong twice, and when he got to the end of it, he set it down and put both hands flat on the wood and said nothing for a while. "Well," Nell said. "Well," said Wade, "you'll not need me to write them out now." Wade Trumbull looked up at her. "Miss Braithwaite," he said, "I have not needed you to write them out since about the 3rd week of March. I'd have thought that was plain." Nell Braithwaite stood behind her own counter in her own office and discovered that after 6 years of knowing everything about everybody, there was one thing she had not worked out at all. "Say that again," she said. "I'd rather not. It took me 11 months to get it out the once." "Say it anyway." Wade Trumbull turned his hat over in his hands. 3 years you've sat in a 10-foot room sending everybody's words in this county but your own," he said. "So say some. To me. I'll not be able to read them." He looked at her. "But I can hear." They were married in November, and she kept the office and she kept her name on the door, which the sign painter queried twice and then painted exactly as she had written it out for him. She never did open the letter from Clyde Merrick. It stayed in the tin box for a few years, and then at some point it was not in the tin box anymore, and neither of them could ever remember which of them had finally thrown it out. Wade went up for the gather every spring for another 19 years and never lost a herd, and he could still walk a pen and tell you which steer was full of water and which one would go lame, and he was still the only man in that county who could do it. He never did get fast at reading and never came to enjoy it much, but on Tuesday evenings, when the wire had gone quiet and the blinds were down, he would take whatever had come in that day off the counter and read it out to her. The market at Omaha, the weather off the wire, a notice from the Clarion, whatever there was. Slow and out loud and wrong about every fourth word. And Nell Braithwaite, who had spent 6 years hearing every word in that county except the ones she wanted, sat and listened and did not correct him. You know what stays with me about this one? Shame is a quiet thing, and it does its work in the dark. And the way you can tell it is doing its work is that a person goes silent about one particular subject and stays silent about it for 30 years. Wade Trumbull was not ashamed of being unable to read. He was ashamed of being found out. Those are different, and the second one is the one that costs you. It cost him a contract he could not read and $600 he did not have, because when a man is holding 4 pages and a pencil cross and somebody is watching him comfortably from across a barrelhead, the price of saying, "I can't read this," feels, in that second, higher than the price of signing. It never is. It only feels that way. And Nell had a shame of her own, and hers was a different animal altogether, because hers had been done to her in public and in code. She was not the woman who was jilted. She was the woman who tapped it out herself, 41 words, checked it, relayed it, and finished her shift. After that, she decided her own words were not safe to send, and she sent everyone else's instead for 3 years and called it a profession. So here is the thing I keep turning over. There is a very small difference between a private person and a person in hiding, and only one of them is at peace. If there is one subject you have gone quiet about for years, one thing you would rather sign than admit, you already know what it is. You do not have to announce it. You only have to say it once, out loud, to one person who will not talk slower afterward. Thank you, truly, for spending this evening with me. Until the next trail, friend, leave the porch light on.